The Syllabus of Errors, condemned by Pius IX. Note: this is a list of errors according to Pope Pius IX, and as I read them, they are not Pius IX's opinions. How the encyclical is set up is each chapter is titled, for instance, chapter 1 is titled Pantheism, Naturalism, and Absolute Rationalism, and then there lists errors that are related to the above chapter title, and then it goes on to the next one. For example, chapter 2 would be Moderate Rationalism. What this means is he is literally listing the errors of each of these belief systems. So when I read one of the errors, it's not something that's propagated by Pope Pius IX. It is simply something that he considers an error and wanted the Church Universal to realize the error also. So I wanted to make that note. Another note I'd like to make is each of these errors, while many of these errors are actually quoted as a mistake, and Pope Pius IX documents where a lot of these errors are come from word for word, and because a lot of these are in Latin and a lot of this is just going to make this a lot more confusing, I'm just going to skip that part and just read what he says and leave out the citations for it. I'll leave a link to the encyclical where if you'd like to read the citations, you can go to the link and read them yourself. It's not going to be very pleasant for me to read these, especially stopping to cite all of these things that aren't going to mean anything to a vast majority, probably everybody who listens to this. So those are my notes. I'll start reading now. The Syllabus of Errors, condemned by Pius IX. Chapter 1. Pantheism, Naturalism, and Absolute Rationalism. Error 1. There exists no supreme, all-wise, all-provident divine being, distinct from the universe, and God is identical with the nature of things, and is, therefore, subject to changes. In effect, God is produced in man and in the world, and all things are God, and they have the very substance of God, and God is one and the same thing with the world, and therefore spirit with matter, necessity with liberty, good with evil, justice with injustice. Error 2. All action of God upon man and the world is to be denied. Objection 3. Human reason without any reference whatsoever to God is the sole arbiter of truth and falsehood, and of good and evil. It is law to itself, and suffices by its natural force to secure the welfare of men and of nations. Error 4. All truths of religion proceed from the innate strength of human reason. Hence reason is the ultimate standard by which man can and ought to arrive at the knowledge of all truths of every kind. Error 5. Divine revelation is imperfect and therefore subject to continual and indefinite progress, corresponding with the advancement of human reason. Error 6. The faith of Christ is in opposition to human reason, and divine revelation is not only is not useful, but it is even harmful to the perfection of man. Error 7. The prophecies and miracles set forth and recorded by sacred scriptures are the fiction of poets, and the mysteries of the Christian faith the result of philosophical investigations. In the books of the Old and New Testament there are contained mythical inventions, and Jesus Christ himself is a myth. Chapter 2. Moderate Rationalism. Error 8. As human reason is placed on the level with religion itself, so theological must be treated in the same way as philosophical sciences. Error 9. All the dogmas of the Christian religion are indiscriminately the object of natural science or philosophy, and human reason, enlightened solely in a historical way, is able, by its own natural strength and principles, to attain to the true science of even the most abstruse dogmas, provided only that such dogmas be proposed to reason itself as its object. Error 10. As the philosopher is one thing, and philosophy another, so it is right and duty of the philosopher to subject himself to the authority which he shall prove to be true. But philosophy can nor ought to submit to any such authority. Error 11. The Church not only ought never pass judgment on philosophy, but ought to tolerate the errors of philosophy, leaving it to correct itself. Error 12. The decrees of the Apostolic See and of the Roman congregations impede the true progress of science. Error 13. The method and principles by which the old scholastic doctors cultivated theology are no longer suitable to the demands of our times and to the progress of sciences. Error 14. Philosophy is to be treated without taking any account of supernatural revelation. Chapter 3. Indifferentism, latitudinarianism. Error 15. Every man is free to embrace and profess that religion which, guided by the light of reason, he shall consider untrue. Error 16. Man may, in the observance of any religion whatsoever, find the way of eternal salvation and arrive at eternal salvation. Error 17. Good hope, at least, is to be entertained of the eternal salvation of all those who are not at all in the true Church of Christ. 18. Error 18. Protestantism is nothing more than another form of the same true Christian religion in which it is given to please God equally as in the Catholic Church. Chapter 4. Socialism, Communism, Secret Societies, Biblical Societies, Clerical, Liberal Societies. Pests of this kind are frequently reprobated in the severest terms. And then he gives a list of various encyclicals which you can check for yourself. Chapter 5. Errors concerning the Church and her rights. Error 19. The Church is not a true and perfect society, entirely free, nor is she endowed with proper and perpetual rights of her own, conferred upon her by her divine founder, but it appertains to the civil power to define what are the rights of the Church, and the limits within which she may exercise those rights. Error 20. The ecclesiastical power ought not to exercise its authority without permission and assent of the civil government. Error 21. The Church has not the power of defining dogmatically that the religion of the Catholic Church is the only true religion. Error 22. The obligation of which Catholic teachers and authors are strictly bound is confined to those things which are proposed to universal belief as dogmas of faith by the infallible judgment of the Church. Error 23. The Roman pontiffs and ecumenical councils have wandered outside the limits of their powers, have usurped the rights of princes, and have even erred in defining matters of faith and morals. Error 24. The Church has not the power of using force, nor has she any temporal power, direct or indirect. Error 25. Besides the power inherent in the episcopate, other temporal power has been attributed to it by civil authority granted either explicitly or tacitly, which on that account is revocable by the civil authority whenever it thinks fit. Error 26. The Church has no innate and legitimate right of acquiring and possessing property. Error 27. The sacred ministers of the Church and the Roman Pontiff are to be absolutely excluded from every charge and dominion over temporal affairs. Error 28. It is not lawful for bishops to publish even letters apostolic without the permission of government. Error 29. Favors granted by the Roman Pontiff ought to be considered null unless they have been sought for through civil government. Error 30. The immunity of the Church and of ecclesiastical persons derived its origin from civil law. Error 31. The ecclesiastical forum or tribunal for the temporal causes, whether civil or criminal, of clerics ought by all means to be abolished, even without consulting and against the protest of the Holy See. Error 32. The personal immunity by which clerics are exonerated from military conscription and service in the army may be abolished without violation either of natural right or equality. Its abolition is called for by civil progress, especially in a society framed on the model of a liberal government. Error 33. It does not appertain exclusively to the power of ecclesiastical jurisdiction by right, proper, and innate, to direct the teaching of theological questions. Error 34. The teaching of those who compare the sovereign pontiff to a prince free, and acting in the universal church is a doctrine which prevailed in the Middle Ages. Error 35. There is nothing to prevent the decree of General Council or the act of all peoples from transferring the Supreme Pontiff from the bishop and city of Rome to another bishop and another city. Error 36. The definition of natural council does not admit any subsequent discussion, and the civil authority can, probably a typo, can assume this principle as the basis of fact. Error 37. National churches withdrawn from the authority of the Roman Pontiff and altogether separated can be established. Error 38. The Roman pontiffs have, by their too arbitrary conduct, contributed to the division of the Church into Eastern and Western. Chapter 6. Errors about civil society, considered both in itself and in its relation to the Church. Error 39. The state, as being the origin and source of all rights, is endowed with a certain right, not circumscribed by any limits. Error 40. The teaching of the Catholic Church is hostile to the well-being and interests of society. Error 41. The civil government, even in the hands of an infidel sovereign, has the right to interdict negative power over religious affairs. It therefore possesses not only the right called that of exequatur, but also that of appeal, called appellatio ab absuasu. Error number 42. In the case of conflicting laws enacted by the two powers, the civil law prevails. Error 43. The secular dower has authority to rescind, declare, and render null solemn conventions, commonly called concordats, entered into the Apostolic See regarding the use of rights appertaining to ecclesiastical immunity without the consent of the Apostolic See, and in spite of its protest. Error 44. The civil authority may interfere in matters relating to religion, morality, and spiritual government. Hence, it can pass judgment on the instructions issued for the guidance of consciences, conformably with their mission by the pastors of the Church. Further, it has the right to make enactments regarding the administration of the divine sacraments and the dispositions necessary for receiving them. Error 45. The entire government of public schools, in which the youth are a Christian state, is educated except to a certain extent in the case of episcopal seminaries, may and ought to appertain to the civil power, and belong to it as far as no other authority whatsoever shall be recognized as having any right to interfere in the discipline of the schools, the arrangement of the studies, the conferring of degrees, and the choice or approval of the teachers. Error 46. Moreover, even in ecclesiastical seminaries, the methods of study to be adopted is subject to the civil authority. Error number 47. The best theory of civil society requires that popular schools open to children of every class of the people, and generally all public institutes intended for instruction in letters and philosophical sciences and for carrying on the education of youth, shall be freed from all ecclesiastical authority, control, and interference, and should be fully subjected to the civil and political power at the pleasure of the rulers, and according to the standard of the prevalent opinions of the age. Error number 48. Catholics may approve of the system of educating youth unconnected with Catholic faith and the power of the Church, in which regards the knowledge of merely natural things, and only, or at least primarily, the ends of the earthly social life. Error number 49. The civil power may prevent the prelates of the Church and the faithful from communicating freely and mutually with the Roman Pontiff. Error number 50. Lay authority possesses of itself the right of presenting bishops, and may require them to undertake the administration of the diocese before they receive canonical instruction and the letters of the apostolic from the Holy See. Error number 51. And further, the lay government has the right of deposing bishops from their pastoral functions, and is not bound to obey the Roman Pontiff in those things which relate to the institution of bishoprics and the appointment of bishops. Error number 52. Government can, by its own right, alter the age prescribed by the Church for the religious profession of men and women, and may require of all religious orders to admit no person to take solemn vows without its permission. Error number 53. The laws enacted for the protection of religious orders and regarding their rights and duties ought to be abolished. Nay, more, civil government may lend its assistance to all who desire to renounce the obligation which they have undertaken of a religious life, and break their vows. Government may also suppress the said religious orders, and likewise colligate churches and simple benefices, even those who advowson and subject their property and revenues to the administration and pleasure of the civil power. Error number 54. Kings and princes are not only exempt from the jurisdiction of the church, but are superior to the church in deciding questions of jurisdiction. Error 55. The church ought to be separated from the state, and the state from the church. Chapter 7. Errors concerning natural and Christian ethics. Error number 56. Moral laws do not stand in need of divine sanction, and it is not at all necessary for human laws to be made comfortable to the laws of nature and receive their power binding from God. Error number 57. The science of philosophical things and morals, and also civil laws, and ought to keep aloof from divine and ecclesiastical authority. Error number 58. No other forces are to be recognized except those which reside in matter, and all the rectitude and excellence of morality ought to be placed in the accumulation and increases of riches of every possible means, and the gratification of pleasure. Error number 59. The right consists in the material fact. All humans' duties are an empty word, and all human facts have the force of right. Error number 60. Authority is nothing else but numbers and the sum total of material forces. Error number 61. The injustice of an act, when successful, inflicts no injury on the sanctity of right. Error number 62. The principle of non-intervention, as it is called, ought to be proclaimed and observed. Error number 63. It is lawful to refuse obedience to legitimate princes and even rebel against them. Error number 64. The violation of any solemn oath, as well as any wicked and flagitious action repugnant to the eternal law, is not only blamable, but is altogether lawful and worthy of the highest praise when done through love of country. Chapter 8. Errors concerning Christian marriage. Error number 65. The doctrine that Christ has raised marriage to the dignity of a sacrament cannot be tolerated. Error number 66. The sacrament of marriage is only a something accessory to the contract and separate from it, and the sacrament itself consists in the nuptial benediction alone. Error number 67. By the law of nature, the marriage tie is not dissoluble, and in many cases divorce properly so called may be decreed by the civil authority. Error number 68. The Church has not the power of establishing impediments of marriage, but such a power belongs to the civil authority by which existing impediments are to be removed. Error number 69. In the Dark Ages the Church began to establish diriment impediments, not by her own right, but by the power borrowed from the state. Error number 70. The canons of the Council of Trent, which anathematized those who dare to deny the Church the right of establishing diriment impediments, either are not dogmatic or must be understood as referring to borrowed power. Error number 71. The form of solemnizing marriage prescribed by the Council of Trent under pain of nullity does not bind in cases where civil law lays down another form, and declares that when this new form is used, marriage shall be valid. Error number 72. Boniface VIII was the first who declared that the vow of chastity taken at ordination renders marriage void. Error number 73. In the force of a merely civil contract, which there may exist between Christians or real marriage, and it is false to say either that the marriage contract between Christians is always a sacrament, and that there is no contract if the sacrament to be excluded. Error number 74. Matrimonial causes and espousals belong by their nature to civil tribunals. Chapter 9. Errors regarding the civil power of the sovereign pontiff. Error number 75. The children of the Christian and Catholic Church are divided amongst themselves about the compatibility of the temporal and spiritual power. Error number 76. The abolition The abolition of the temporal power of which the Apostolic See is possessed would contribute to the greatest degree to the liberty and prosperity of the Church. Chapter 10. Errors having reference to modern liberalism. Error 77. In the present day it is no longer expedient that the Catholic religion should be held as the only religion of the state, to the exclusion of all other forms of worship. Error number 78. Hence it has been wisely decided by law that in some Catholic countries, that persons coming to reside therein shall enjoy the public exercise of their own particular worship. Error number 79. However, it is false that the civil liberty of every form of worship and the full power given to all of overtly and publicly manifesting any opinions whatsoever and thoughts conduce more easily to corrupt the morals and minds of the people and to propagate the pest of indifferentism. And error 80. The Roman Pontiff can and ought to reconcile himself and come to terms with progress, liberalism, and modern civilization. That is the list of errors. I'm going to continue with the last paragraphs. The faith teaches us, and human reason demonstrates, that a double order of things exists, and that we must therefore distinguish between the two earthly powers, the one of natural origin, which provides for secular affairs and the tranquility of human society, and the other of supernatural origin, which presides over the city of God, that is to say, the Church of Christ, which has been divinely instituted for the sake of souls and eternal salvation. The duties of this twofold power are most wisely ordered in such a way that to God is given what is God's, and because of God to Caesar what is Caesar's, who is great because he is smaller than heaven. Certainly the Church has never disobeyed this divine command, and the Church has always and everywhere instructs the faithful to show the respect which they should inviolately have for the supreme authority and its secular rights. Venerable brethren, you can see clearly enough how sad and full of perils is the condition of Catholics in the regions of Europe which we have mentioned. Nor are things any better or circumstances calmer in America, where some regions are so hostile to Catholics that their governments seem to deny by their actions the Catholic faith they claim to profess. In fact, there for the past few years a ferocious war on the Church, its institutions, and the rights of the Apostolic See have been raging. Venerable brothers, it is surprising that in our time such a great war is being waged against the Catholic Church. But anyone who knows the nature, desires, and intentions of the sects, whether they be called Masonic or bear another name, and compares them with nature, the systems and vastness of the obstacles of which the Church has been assailed almost everywhere, cannot doubt that the present misfortune must mainly be imputed to the frauds and maledications of these sects. It is from them that the synagogue of Satan, which gathers its troops against the Church of Christ, takes its strength. In the past, our predecessors, vigilant even from the beginning in Israel, has already denounced them to the kings and the nations, and had condemned them time and time again. Even we have not failed in this duty. Of those who would have been able to avert such deadly scourge, had only had more faith in the supreme pastors of the Church. But this scourge, winding through sinuous caverns, deceiving many with astute frauds, finally has arrived at the point where it has come forth impetuously from its hiding place and triumphs over as a powerful master. Since the throng of its propagandists have grown enormously, these wicked groups think that they have already become masters of the world, and that they have almost reached their pre-established goal. Having sometimes obtained what they desired, and that is power in several countries, they boldly turn the help of the powers and authorities which they have secured by trying to submit the Church of God to the most cruel servitude, and undermine the foundations of which it rests, to contaminate its splendid qualities, and moreover to strike it with frequent blows, to shake it, to overthrow it, and, if possible, to make it disappear completely from the earth. Things being thus, venerable brothers, make every effort to defend the faithful which are entrusted to you against the insidious contagion of these sects, and to save from the perdition those who unfortunately have inscribed themselves in such sects. Make known and attack those who, whether suffering from or planning deception, are not afraid to affirm that these shady congregations aim only at the profit of society, at progress and mutual benefit, Explain to them often and express deeply on their souls the papal constitutions on this subject, and teach them that the Masonic associations are anathematized by them, not only in Europe, but also in America and wherever they may be in the whole world. To the archbishops and bishops of Prussia concerning the situation of the Catholic Church faced with persecution by that government. But although they, the bishops resisting persecution, should be praised rather than pitied, the scorn of episcopal dignity, the violation of the liberty and the rights of the Church, the ill treatment which does not only oppose those dioceses, but also the others in the kingdom of Prussia, demand that we, owing to the apostolic office of which God has entrusted us, in spite of our insufficient merit, protest against the laws which have produced great evils, and made one fear even the greater ones. And as far as we are able to do so, with the sacred authority of divine law, we vindicate the Church for the freedom which have been trodden underfoot with sacrilegious violence. That is why this letter we intend to do our duty by announcing openly to all those of this manner concern to the whole Catholic Church, and that these laws are null and void, because they are absolutely contrary to the divine constitution of the Church. In fact, with respect to these matters which concern the holy ministry, our Lord did not put mightily in this century in charge, but St. Peter, whom he entrusted, not only with feeding his sheep, but also the goats, and therefore no power in this world, however great it may be, can deprive the pastoral offices of those whom the Holy Ghost has made bishops in order to feed the Church.